thing, they do support sustainable fisheries. Sanctuary zones are not about banning fishing, they're about ensuring that we have ongoing fishing. And this is an example from the Mediterranean, 9 marine sanctuary zones where there's no fishing. This is the distance from the boundary of the sanctuary zone, and the closer you get to the boundary, the better the fishing, the more money you earn. Right? And the best evidence we actually have about why sanctuary zones work is not from scientists like me, it's actually from fishers, because they know where the best fishing is. And this applies to a number of species. And even for recreational fishing, the Merritt Island National Park in Florida, this is actually a really cool marine park because it's right next to Cape Canaveral, where the rockets go up. And what they did was they set up this sanctuary zone because they didn't want rockets falling on fishermen's heads and then they'd sue because they're American. So basically what they did is say, here's a big no-go area, you can't go there, we're going to have a sanctuary zone. And what they found was that on the boundaries of these sanctuaries of this sanctuary zone, they caught all the record fish. And these drums, black drum and red drum, they're actually related to our mulloway. They're in the same family, the croakers. They make that interesting noise. And that's where you catch the good fish, on the boundary of the sanctuary zone. So I just want to talk a little about myths, because there's lots of interesting views on sanctuary zones. So the first myth around fishing in sanctuary zones is that the fishing's still good. This is a picture of a groper caught in Medham's Pool, which is right in metropolitan Perth in the 1940s. I've never seen such a fish in Perth, despite lots of snorkeling and swimming. And people say, look, they're still out there. You can still catch a big fish, it's fine, but now you have to go to Augusta, or a lot further. So yes, there are still big fish out there, but it doesn't mean that we haven't depleted them in areas and places like Kilcarnap are now devoid of these fish. So the myth is that it's not so good at fishing. It's okay. It's better than Canada probably, but it ain't great. It's not what it was. Second myth around sanctuary zones is that we will have apocalyptic devastation. If we close this area, it'll push everybody out to those areas, and then those areas will become deserts because everybody will just absolutely nail them. There will be no fish there. So there were a number of studies that were done where they looked at areas proposed for sanctuary zones before. So this is the fish area and the proposed sanctuary zone, and they were about similar in their fish. And after, when the sanctuary zone came in, you got the expected benefit of more fish and bigger fish in the sanctuary zone, but the fish actually increased outside the sanctuary zone as well, in the areas that were being fished. So this whole idea that sanctuary zones will just be the end of fishing is unsupported by evidence. This is perhaps my favorite myth. It's them, not me. So if I talk to recreational fishers, they say, it's the pros, they're just ruining it. And if you talk to commercial guys, it's the recreational fishermen, they're just ruining it. Doesn't really matter, really. If you bring in a protected area that allows one or the other, you don't get conservation benefits. What we know is that if you want to actually see an increase in the abundance and size of fish with spillover benefits, you have to close it out to both. There's no partial recreational fishing zones, wilderness fishing zones. They're not going to generate benefits. So at the end of the day, regardless of how we got here, regardless of whose fault it is, if you want to see recovery, you actually have to have sanctuary zones, full no closures. And this has been demonstrated by around the world, effectively. And in particular, it relates to lobster and king snapper, and these are species, well, we don't have that particular species of lobster, but it's similar environments to what we have here. And honestly, the whole, whose fault is just like marriage counseling. Poaching. The other argument you get of why sanctuary zones won't work is that people won't respect them, and that they'll poach, and enforcement's too expensive. So on the Great Barrier Reef, coral trout in the sanctuary zones increased by about 300%, and poaching, when estimated, was less than 1%. So you've got a 300% increase against a 1% level of poaching. So I think the most important thing to recognize here is that it's all about cultural change. People won't. We have speeding limits, even though people still speed, some of them, sometimes. So what we need to recognize is that as we bring these sanctuary zones in, people will be excited about them, they'll see the benefits, and 99% of people, like the speed limits, will respect them, and we will get the conservation benefits. And it's not about niggling about how much the government's going to have to pay for enforcement, because that will come, and we need to invest in that. So, my last slide, and this is what relates to the Southwest. The big question is this protection? Is this what we want for marine biodiversity outcomes in the Southwest? What the federal government has proposed is these green zones, which are the no-take sanctuary zones, with the remaining of the area still open to oil and gas exploration and fishing. And an obvious one is the Mental Basin region, which Rob was referring to, where you can still go and put an oil rig in. So effectively what we have is large areas of protection in the abyss, between 3,000 and 5,000 meters of water where nobody currently goes. And that's actually really important. We need to protect those areas. But what is really obvious in this slide is that for all intents and purposes, nothing along the west coast has been protected, and nothing on the continental shelf other than one little bit here and here has been protected. So this is not protection. And when we start participating in the consultation process, I think what's really important is to realize that marine parks without sanctuary zones are like a Ferrari with a lawnmower for an engine. They've got no grunt. And what we have currently is a system of sanctuary zones that don't actually have a lot of grunt in them. And I would encourage all of you to push really hard to make sure that you've got good protection off the Margaret River region, but also more broadly for the Southwest, so that we actually have a network of sanctuary zones that do justice to the fantastic marine environment that we have in this state.